A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a great adventure took place.
Talking Bird, a special edition.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 59, The Rise of Giacchino. I am your host, Robert Zachary, along with my co-host, John Llewellyn. Hello, John.
Hello. I'm ready to talk some Star Wars.
We should do something snappy like, and your man from Austin. I'm the man from Seattle. Austin.
The live music, I don't know.
The Austin city limits of podcasting. And that some coffee joke or who cares? Who cares?
Or a fish throwing joke, I guess. That's the only other thing that's not the only other thing I know about Seattle, but that's the only other notable thing.
That's only okay for other Seattleites to say. You're not allowed to talk about fish throwing. That's for us.
Okay.
How's it going?
It's going good. Going well, excuse me. It's going well.
Going good.
Ooh, we got some topics, eh?
Yeah, we do. We got
a lot of topics this week.
We got the Coleman going and some back bacon, and we're going to talk about Alexandre Desplat or whatever. No, we do have a lot of stuff. Well, actually, I would say that most of this kind of centers. I mean, most of the locus of what we're going to talk about centers around musical stuff, and luckily, John has some education in that regard, and I will probably just be like the kind of guy when it comes to the real technical stuff.
We'll find out.
No, I can fake it. I can fake it with the best of them. But let's just get into some late breaking news, which I wouldn't consider this big news, but it's interesting. The Han Solo, well, I guess it's the untitled Han Solo, or maybe it's just going to be called the Han Solo. I don't know, but the directors, I guess they're co-directors, Miller and Lord, have picked their cinematographer, which is Bradford Young, and he's been doing movies for a while. He's done some music videos. He'd probably be best known for Selma. And the forthcoming Denis Villeneuve, I think it's coming out. It's going to be their big holiday. I think it's Paramount's big holiday thing, The Arrival, with Jeremy Renner. And
although it ties into the conversation that you and I were having just before we started recording, it's like they're showing it at the Fantastic Fest here in Austin this weekend.
Oh, they are showing Arrival.
It looks like it is on the schedule, yes.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's one of those situations where the movie's done and it's literally just waiting for the right place to put it out. So you could, if you're interested and you're in Austin and you're at Fantastic Fest, you can see the cinematographer for the Han Solo anthology film. I mean, the thing about it was kind of funny because I was thinking about this and I'm like, oh, that's cool. I should talk about it on the show. And then I said to myself, well, who was the cinematographer for all the other movies? And it became this thing where the only thing I remember, and if I'm not mistaken, I think Gil Taylor was, maybe he wasn't maybe he was the DP. I mean, that's the problem. I don't know. I get my terms mixed up and, my point is that the only thing I really know about camera people.
We know a little bit about how movies are made, but not. Yeah. We're not insiders.
Exactly. And that I remember George Lucas famously had a problem with Gil Taylor, but I don't think but it was about some kind of gauze or something on the lens or something like
so
that.
Steve Yedlin was the cinematographer for The Force Awakens,
right? And I've mentioned who Ryan Johnson used.
I'm sorry, he's the cinematographer for Episode 8, rather.
Oh no, yeah, he's the guy who's. I actually did read his blog post about how he kind of basically, in his opinion, had figured out how to make digital look like film, but Ryan Johnson was like, no, we're still using film, much to his chagrin. But I mean, these kind of things are important, but how important, it's hard to know, because I think we're at this point where there's kind of almost a house style, and it's limiting, I think. I mean, obviously, a cinematographer, is how I understand it, it's a combination of, what the director wants and what the actual sets look like, and they make all their decisions. So it's kind of they work
right. And there's like kind of a conversation going on with the director and the cinematographer and the director of photography about like lighting and filters and exposure, the lens length, all that kind of stuff.
So it's hard to know how much direct influence a cinematographer has on the film, but maybe as time goes on, maybe I'll go down that rabbit hole sometime and we can talk about it. But I think the big news, I mean, do we want to do the poster stuff and then kind of...
The big news is we have some international posters for Rogue One now.
Yeah, I mean...
That's the biggest news that's happened in the last 7 days.
I was just trying to build up some anticipation, I don't want to...
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we should talk. I think. There's some internet. There's only 2. Did you see them?
Yeah, there's the one in Japan and one in South Korea. The one from Japan is Daisy Ridley standing on the beach with the poofy clouds, and then above that is the kind of silhouette of the Death Star. And then the South Korean one is all of the band of rebels. They're all kind of arranged a little Charlie's Angels style. What looks like perhaps the interior of the Death Star, or the interior of some kind of Imperial area. So they have the international posters. I like the Japanese one a lot better. I mean, the issue with the South Korean one is like, okay, this was clearly made in Photoshop and did not take very long to make. I mean, the Japanese one doesn't look like it took that long to make either, but
right.
It at least, the silhouette of the Death Star is neat, and it's a little more intriguing, right? You see it and go, oh, what's this? Like, who's this lady and on a beach with this thing about overhead? Whereas the other one's just like, all right, here's everyone who's in the movie,
right?
So, but I do miss the days of the international posters for Star Wars movies being these like insane paintings of like monsters that aren't even in Star Wars, and just like, Darth Vader, except then half of his helmet just devolves into this weird architectural thing, or
Absolutely.
Like those kinds of, like, okay, tell the artist like, yeah, just go nuts, just paint something. And now it seems like it's more of, all right, come up with something on Photoshop that we can just put up really quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I think I've said on this show before, and basically I feel like kind of the art of the movie poster in this country, and even internationally, it's kind of dead. It's not, and we've gone from, 40 years of, having, not a year goes by where I don't all of a sudden see a Star Wars poster from that era, from the first from the first trilogy era, where I see a Star Wars poster that I'd never seen before, and illustration and have you ever seen the I think it was maybe in Czechoslovakia or the Czech Republic that they had done, or maybe it was Poland, and I'm sorry, I don't remember which one, but years ago these images had come out of illustrations from The Heir to the Empire. Like they had, I guess they did an edition over there where they actually had illustrations within the book, and it was just like crazy, like I wouldn't say it would be like, oh, this is exactly the way Star Wars should look, but it was such a different take that it, like, you couldn't help but kind of go, wow, this is really interesting. But yeah, I mean, we're kind of at this weird thing where it's like, well, this international stuff where you would expect them to maybe take a chance, or it honestly kind of feels like, oh, these are just kind of recomposited shots of pre-existing material. And yes, there's a little bit more art to it, because I not a huge fan. I wasn't a huge fan of the Force Awakens poster, and this whole kind of weird beach battle thing that's going on for Rogue One is, to me, it just, but I feel like we've come to the point where a poster is not how they market a movie anymore. So I'm actually, as far as Star Wars art going, the most exciting stuff that I'm seeing is out of this contest that was it Lucasfilm proper or StarWars.com had for illustration.
I think it was Lucasfilm for the concept art competition. Yeah, I think it was Lucasfilm, and the prize, they had 3 winners. And I think the prize involved like either getting an internship or somehow working for Lucasfilm and kind of getting a foot in the door.
Right. Yeah, I don't think it was the brass ring, so to speak, but yeah, it was definitely, and even the stuff that didn't make it, I was pretty, I just love the way that some of these artists had, thought out this stuff. They, scenes that are things that couldn't possibly even be in a Star Wars movie with the timeline or whatever, and crash ships and
and there were 3 different phases of it too. There was like the moment where they had to create, like a traditional concept art of just like, okay, like a key moment in something, and then there was the next phase they had to design specific vehicles, and then beyond that, like, it was like, okay, pretend you're actually a concept artist and let's see what, how you work and like what your working style is like. But yeah, so, you would get these kind of interesting or, new takes on Star Wars vehicles. And then you'd also get, images of, one of the winners was some bounty hunter, I guess, presenting someone's hand to, the emperor, or at least the Imperial Guards, and so okay, that's kind of an interesting idea. Or there's a really nice kind of romantic image of what looks like Leia sitting on a speeder bike on Endor, just kind of watching the sunset, and like, yeah, that's a nice idea too. Like, not necessarily for, it certainly recalls different moments that already exist within Star Wars, but it's like, okay, here's a new context for it. And honestly, that is pretty similar to some of the art that's in that Art of the Force Awakens book, where it's, okay, let's take some previous Star Wars moments and like put a new character in them, or take this character and see what it looks like if they're on a speeder bike, or a speeder bike that looks, it has like an extra thing on the side of it. What does that look like? So yeah, there's still, even though, I mean, there's so much concept art and artwork already out there for Star Wars, there's still a lot of room to kind of find new entry points to it.
Yeah, and the 3 artists is Mario Alberti, Morgan Yan, and Fred Palacio. And you can see that in StarWars.com. I mean, there's, like I said, I wouldn't want those kind of things on posters, but I would love to look at a book of them. The only thing is, before we jump into this music conversation, do we want to talk about the Bob Iger stuff too? I mean,
yeah, sure, because I don't have a lot to say about that either, so we can
basically
clear the decks.
Yeah, Bob Iger was saying that, well, they're going to be doing Star Wars movies through 2021, which
2020 he confirmed. I guess we had talked a while ago that Simon Kinberg was writing the script for a new anthology movie, and so he confirmed that, yeah, there's going to be a Star Wars anthology movie coming out in 2020, and that Lucasfilm is currently kind of mapping out what their output is going to look like starting in 2021 and then into the future. So
yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody's surprised that there was going to be more Star Wars, and this third anthology movie has been kind of hovering around in the ether. Well, not really. I mean, people knew it was there. It's just because of Josh Trank leaving, whatever that is. Either they maybe they used it as an opportunity to reevaluate their idea of what they want to do in that third movie, or they truly want to wait until see how Rogue One is received before. Because I mean, Iger, I think it was a separate interview, or maybe it was the same. He kind of admitted that the projections for box office for Rogue One have been tempered a lot compared to what The Force Awakens. I mean, I think everybody was a little nervous about how a brand new non-George Lucas movie was going to be received, but I think they operated in good faith that, hey, Star Wars is, as long as we try to be true to it, it'll do well. Whereas I think, I think they're being cautiously optimistic. I mean, it's kind of interesting because it's like, even now, there's more. It feels like there's more toys going to come out, and it's like, or maybe that's partly because they were in a situation where they didn't want to kind of spoil it, like they would have. Didn't want to spoil the movie and a lot of these, classic characters coming back. And since there's not going to be a lot of classic characters in this movie, that they can kind of like, well, we can show people as long as we don't put the whole plot of the movie on the back of the card. And I think the 30th of this month is the what is it? The Rogue,
the Rebels premiere.
Well,
the Rebels premiere is tomorrow or Saturday.
Right, and then there's a Rogue Friday or whatever, the toy release, which I've been seeing on Instagram and whatnot from actual like real Star Wars collectors that they've been buying stuff for a week now. It's like some of the retailers have already put. I was at a electronics store called Fry's, which I think they're all up down the West Coast, and
we have one here.
Okay, yeah. I think in Arizona, Fry's is a grocery store, so it's kind of a. I don't know. I didn't know which one is which, but yeah, they already had the Stormtrooper with the jetpack, which like it was a 12-inch toy with all these like 62 original phrases and stuff, and it's like. It was I was kind of hoping I could find some Black Series, because like I've already seen reviews of some of the new Black Series, but I haven't really put that much effort into finding them. It's just like, oh, I'm in a Target. Let me wander over and look at the toys.
Right.
So I think
that's kind of my approach to like I'll just see what's around, and if it's nothing too major, I'm not worried about.
Yeah, I like I said, I'm pretty much at the point where I'm thinking I'll either I'll probably just get a Death Trooper. At first I was going to get the what's the name of Alan Tudyk's? What's the droid's name?
K2SO.
K2SO, but I'm kind of like, I think I'm going to need to see K2SO in action, because if I, no offense to Mr. Tudyk, but if he turns out to be the Jar Jar Binks of droids, I don't want one on my shelf. But yeah, I guess that's all we got. But I mean, the only other thing I would say is that.
Well, what do you make of Iger also kind of setting expectations lower for Rogue One and saying, well, Rogue One's an experiment and we don't expect it to do as well as at the box office as The Force Awakens? I mean, do you think that's a smart idea, or I mean, I guess the danger is, right, he's not really talking to the hardcore Star Wars fans, right? He's talking to investors, and he's talking to. He basically doesn't want this movie to be perceived as a flop if it doesn't do as well as The Force Awakens or some other big franchise, right? He wants to set expectations of like, okay, this is not going to outperform Episode 7, and he's also some of these comments, other people who aren't as deep into the Star Wars rabbit hole as even we are, right? And there are certainly people who are consuming this news and all this content even more than we are. But those people, we all know that. So he's kind of also talking, but people who haven't been keeping up with it, they're sort of starting to become aware. Okay, the toys are starting to come out. Oh, I guess there's a Star Wars movie. What is this going to be about? And so his comments are sort of aimed at those people that yeah, this is sort of an experiment and we'll see how this works, which, has been known and been said for a while, but it's just you have a new crowd of people starting to pay attention for the first time. At the same time, though, I do wonder if, this maybe tempers enthusiasm among fans. I mean, certainly, the hardcore fans, we all have a pretty good idea of what this is going to be, and yeah, it's not going to involve the Skywalkers, and who knows what we're going to get out of Gareth Edwards, but the Jyn Erso character looks interesting, and these other characters look neat, and you have a very kind of international cast, and so that's kind of interesting. For Bob Iger to come and say well, this is just an experiment, and we don't really expect this to do as well. It almost comes in like a thud, and you're just just let people be excited for this movie. That's kind of the only thing I'm worried about. Is just let people be excited about this movie. Yeah. And don't no one really ever really expected it to do as well as Episode 7. I can't imagine.
I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it, because it's my initial reaction would be oh, well, he can say whatever. It's Star Wars. I'm going to go see it. I'm going to go see it twice. I might.
Well, there's that too. Is that he can say well, yeah, we don't expect this movie to do well or as well, knowing full well that it's Star Wars, and you're going to have a lot of people who are going to go see it just because it's Star Wars. And so, right, there's very low risk in him saying well, this movie's not going to do as well as Episode 7.
Yeah, and you could honestly, say that there is some risk about him going out there and kind of beating his chest about how we're opening up a new realm in Star Wars and and we're really happy. And because it's people are already out there. They already know that there have been reshoots, as we are going to talk about sooner rather than later. There's already been a change in who's scoring the movie, which some people have said, oh, does this mean that this movie's in trouble? I think that he's talking to investors because they are the most skittish of all the people of all the plates that he has spinning as a CEO or whatever I don't know if CEO or CFO. I don't know what his position actually is. He's the head cheese of a major corporation. It's any kind of doom and gloom could cause problems, and any kind of, overestimating. And I think that Disney as a company has an interesting slate this fall and winter that they were coming right into having, they had a good first half with, Captain America did really well for Marvel. I think it's the highest grossing film of the year so far. And they were coming off of, people were still excited about The Force Awakens. And then look at the slate that's coming out in the next couple months. It's well, we've got Doctor Strange, which I don't know if you've seen any of the trailers. It's it's a character. I don't think that, I'm a little old, so I never watched the cartoons. I don't know if he was a big part of the cartoons or not, but
I don't think so.
Doctor Strange was kind of when I was growing up, it was kind of the weirdo comic that the older older kids read, and it was a lot more. It was wordier. It was a lot more you had to have every issue sometimes to understand it. So it was not something that I enjoyed, because it's I could only buy a comic every couple of months. It wasn't a monthly thing. So I didn't grow up with Doctor Strange. My interest level in Doctor Strange is almost nil. It's I don't even think I'll go see it in the theater, which, not that I'm the arbiter of what's going to do well, but I'm saying that, if a nerd-ish kind of guy like me is kind of indifferent, I don't know what other people, and then have that with, we've got Star Wars, but it's got nobody in it that you've ever heard of, which in some strange way is almost like what they would have been facing had they decided to move in a completely new direction with the Star Wars saga. If Lucas said, I'll sell you the names, but I'm not selling you any of the characters, or something like that, and they said, oh, we're going to reboot it anyway, we're going to, this is set 200 years after the original trilogy or whatever, and blah blah blah. And I think they'd probably be in a similar, not in the same boat, but in a similar boat, in the sense that they've got brand confusion. I was this weekend we were doing some shopping, and I was in a mall, and went to the Disney store again. I think I went to the Disney store last week, but I was just looking at whatever things had come in to see if there was anything, and they've got that little Jin Urso for little girl outfits, and you can buy a sweatshirt, makes you look like Kylo Ren, all this great stuff. And I'm just looking at it, and this guy comes up and he starts like trying to educate me about what Rogue One was. And it's like as if somehow, right. I don't know if this was something he took upon himself.
Excuse me, sir, have you heard the good news about Lucasfilm?
Exactly. And I kind of stopped him, and I did this thing that I don't do normally if I'm in a kind of a place where there's Star Wars stuff and I don't go, hey, I have a Star Wars podcast you should listen to. But I was like, I already have, I spend 2 hours a week talking about this. It's all right. You don't have to educate me as to the timeline of Rogue One. It's kind of like, it was the only time I didn't feel like a doofus bringing it up, but.
Right. This is when you wanted to make someone else feel like a doofus for bringing it up.
Oh, no, not like that. I am not. Me and this guy had a really good conversation. It was fun.
No, I know.
And then I kicked him in the nuts.
I just did it for the joke.
Kicked him in the nuts, and I stole his wallet.
Yeah. Speaking of, Rogue One has a new composer.
Yes.
What's that for a transition?
I think I'm like driving John nuts by like dragging this out and going like,
No.
I want to talk about me playing the Battlefront DLC. No, we'll talk about that if we have time. No, we'll talk about that if we have time. But yes, this is the big news, at least for us, for people that enjoy Star Wars music.
And this news came out like right after we recorded last week, or like the day after or something like that.
It was the same day. I had just I was editing the show, getting it ready, getting it up, and I had some kind of thing. I was supposed to be going out. Yeah, I went out somewhere, and then I saw it on Twitter, and then I'm like, usually when the show ends, I'm like, all right, John has a busy career. I don't want to bug him with Star Wars stuff until it's about time to do another show. But I was like, I gotta break the rules. I'm texting him, breaking, Alexandre Desplat out. Giacchino in.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, it's big. I think this is kind of a big deal. I don't know if it necessarily means something bad or anything great, but I think it's kind of a big deal.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, for me, like the explanation doesn't really, like there's something slightly off. So the explanation was that with the Rogue One reshoots, now there came to be a scheduling conflict, and so Desplat could no longer do it. So at the same time, when those reshoots came up and people were like, oh, there's a crisis on the set, and oh my god, they have to do these reshoots, and is the movie in trouble? Right? The line then was, well, these reshoots were always in the schedule.
Right.
Which is true, and that part is true. Like every movie does reshoots. Episode 8, they're doing reshoots right now. So Lupita Nyong'o will be, Maz Kanata will be in episode 8. They're doing reshoots, and she's part of that, right?
I didn't know that.
Oh, you didn't?
No.
Oh, that was it. That came out like yesterday, I think.
Oh man, I need to get a Google alert going or something.
Yeah,
because it's like I'm missing out on these things. Anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, right. Pretty much every movie does reshoots in some form or fashion, especially these huge, studio movies do. So, okay, that's fine. But if these reshoots were always in the schedule, which is plausible, why wasn't that built into Alexandre Desplat's schedule? Like, if these reshoots were always going to come up, then why did they suddenly cause a scheduling conflict? So, like, either there was some kind of delay with the reshoots, in which case, like, maybe that it is good, bad, or indifferent. Or also possible, Alexandre Desplat kind of over-scheduled himself and, like, assumed, like, oh, yeah, I can start working on these things. I can start working on this score. I'll have this amount of time to work on the score, and then, I'll move to the next thing. And then he didn't, because he's done enough movies. He has to know that reshoots happen, right?
Right.
So either he overscheduled himself, or a third option might be, again, like these reshoots are more drastic than were let on, and they changed like actual story beats, or either major or minor, or they're new scenes to an extent where like now Alexandre Desplat would have had to go back and like look, it would have involved more than just him tweaking the score or editing what he was already working on to fit, the timing of a different take. Right. It would have involved him either getting a new copy of the script and going through that and basically starting from scratch on those scenes and rewriting those cues. And maybe that's what he was like, okay, that's what I won't have time for. So, moving from Alexandre Desplat to Michael Giacchino, or, just even changing the composer at this stage in the process, it might not be bad, right? We don't know. There may be nothing wrong with that, but the explanation they're using, there's, given that they've already had to come up with like explanations for these reshoots, it's just sort of like, really, is that? I guess I just don't understand how reshoots can cause a scheduling problem if they were already always in the schedule.
Right.
Is basically where I am with this right now.
You just like the conspiracy of it all. But
that's the thing. I don't like, usually for me with these things, it's like, yeah, this is probably just a normal, I mean, for all we know, this happens all the time, and it's just not publicized as much because it's not like a Star Wars movie, and you don't have people trying to root around, looking for new information all the time.
It's so funny you should say that, because this whole conversation has put me in mind of a book that I got a few years ago, called Torn Music: Rejected Film Scores, a Selected History by Hubai, I think is the last name. It's on Amazon. You could use our link and buy it. It's interesting. It is. It's almost like it's kind of a little bit harder to enjoy for a kind of a lay person like myself, whereas I love those 50 movies that never were made, or the best things that you've never seen, or whatever, those kind of things where it's either movies never got finished, or they never got past the production art stage, things like, a lot of these movies actually have been, when I first started reading these books, have been made, like Alien versus Predator and The Watchmen, and a Star Trek movie about how Kirk met Spock. Anyway, this Torn Music is very kind of puts out the fact that, yes, there has been a lot of, there's been a long history of actual scores just being completely rejected. I know that, famously, well, there's probably even examples back in the, the golden era of film, but, Alex North had scored, I think, pretty much 100% of 2001: A Space Odyssey for Kubrick, but Kubrick had fallen in such love with his temp tracks that he just found that he needed to license these things. Now, I think this is probably a different scenario. I mean, I obviously don't know much about Desplat and how his process is, but yeah, I mean, I could have sworn when I saw an interview where they go, hey, this is like months ago, where they're like, hey, what's up with Rogue One? I could have sworn he had said, I'm going in 2 weeks to work on it. And this was before the reshoots had been announced. So I honestly feel like that, yeah, I think we might have had an issue where things, maybe there is some, and going back to what Iger, the Iger conversation, it's very important. You can't just flippantly go out and say, yeah, I'm off that. I can't, they rejected my score, or they want me to rescore they want me to rescore like 45 minutes of a movie for the same price I bid out. You can't talk about that kind of stuff. One, it gets your reputation in the business. Two, it could consequently hurt your bottom end by bad mouthing the place you're working for. Therefore, consumer confidence goes down. It's kind of like this weird thing. So I think, in this age of where even a minor comment can be jumped on, like people like us, and kind of picked apart, that these situations, I think they keep them very, very close to their vest. This is obviously pure speculation on my part, but I honestly, I'm kind of at that point where it's like, I think like you do, I think there was probably some of it had been scored and those scenes don't exist anymore. It's kind of like, wow, now some people don't like, some people are very precious about their scores and they don't want them chopped up, or they feel like that, they're bastardized if they're re-edited. And, John Williams had that issue kind of. I've heard rumors. Now I have nothing to back this up. I can't point to a magazine, so please, grain of salt, that right. Ben Burt, Lucas, and John Williams had a lot of schism during Attack of the Clones because of a similar thing, because Lucas had decided to add this droid factory sequence, which makes sense because I think on the soundtrack, the droid factory sequence is actually only available on like the version of the CD that was released by Target. So it was like manufactured even later than the original. The music's not on there. So that kind of stuff. So I feel like with a guy like Desplat, who's been like, he's more known for doing kind of arty highbrow pictures. It's, maybe he's not even like, he's like, oh, I'd love to have a Star Wars movie in my CV, but he's like, it's not like a thing like, oh, ever since I was a little boy. I mean, is he from France? Is he French?
That's an excellent question. I'm not sure.
I guess I'm making an assumption. I
mean, he definitely has a French accent when I've heard him speak.
Okay. Or maybe
he might,
or he's French Canadian. He's a French. Yeah. He's a film.
No, he's not French Canadian. I believe he is European.
Yes. He was born in Paris, France. So he's a Parisian. So maybe and he's also 55 years old. So maybe Star Wars isn't necessarily like, he's like, I'm thinking of, Ben-Hur and Ten Commandments or, Francois Truffaut films. Maybe that would be like, that's his dream. So it's like, even though he's done stuff like, the Twilight Saga and
Harry Potter, The Golden Compass.
Yeah. I mean, he's
he's also done, Wes Anderson movies and The Queen and The King's Speech and The Imitation Game, those kinds of movies.
The truth of it is he probably doesn't need it. So if it was going to be an issue where they were going to ask for more work out of him or something that was going to screw up a schedule, he's always going to be in demand. This is not going to hurt his career, so he could just politely decline and move on. And whereas I think, I think we'll get into this a little bit more, but I think Giacchino or however you want to pronounce it, that guy is like, I think John Williams is part of the reason he's actually doing this kind of work.
Yep.
I mean, it's kind of I think it's good in a way of that you don't want an angry composer that's kind of contractually obligated to fix a problem that he didn't cause. Or do you want somebody who's, has almost the same level of credits? They're both Academy Award winning composers. It's kind of like they replaced a really great composer with another really great composer. I mean, they work in a way that, I think there is a certain workmanlike attitude, and I've unfortunately never really saw any interviews with Desplat, and the only one I've had with Giacchino is that from that podcast link that you sent me. What's the name? Is it called The Score?
The Score
podcast. That's pretty much the sum total of what I know about him of his views on
Same here.
Composing. But I do know that there was a lot of that kind of wheelhouse of the Disney, the Spielberg, existing in that kind of toy box, almost makes him more of an appropriate choice in retrospect. And the fact that he's, I mean, like I said, I'm putting words in Desplat's mouth. It might literally be what they said. It was like, hey man, I've got to be in, I'm doing the new so-and-so film that week.
Yeah.
There's no way we can work this out. And maybe he's crestfallen about like, I shouldn't speak to the man's motivations, but I think that, listening to some of the Giacchino stuff, it's like, I think this is it's a major change, but I think we're going to be okay,
Yeah. So there are a couple of things I want to touch on that you brought up. One is, I think that one of the most famous, infamous, or, if you pay attention to these things, it's one of the most notable recent examples is the movie Troy. Which is 2001, I think. No, 2004, where Gabriel Yared, who's a terrific film composer, basically had almost the entire score, or if not the entire score, written and recorded, and then they showed the film to a test audience, and the test audience was like, "Yeah, this music's too old-fashioned," and so they replaced Yared. They hired James Horner to do a completely new score, which he wrote and recorded, I guess, in about 4 weeks.
Which is about twice as much.
That's really late in the game to be changing composers. And Yared was pretty annoyed about it. And I think he even he might have posted it himself, or somehow his score for the film got out, was released online somehow. And I think he posted it on his website, or something else. Yared briefly made portions of the rejected score on his personal website, which is later removed at Warner Brothers' request. So somehow that the music is floating around out there, the original score. And then, Horner only had 4 weeks to write the score. And so it turns out a lot of that score was basically cribbed from either other movies or, composers, the Benjamin Britten War Requiem and Shostakovich and Prokofiev, which, and that's not saying that, it was inspired by Prokofiev in the same way that John Williams used Prokofiev or Holst or someone Stravinsky as soundtracks. No, this was okay, there's a fanfare in this thing, and we're just going to put that in the movie, essentially.
Right.
So I think Warner Brothers even had to come out and acknowledge and apologize for the fact that some of that music was just cribbed from other movies, or no, I guess it was. So
speak. Well, I'm going to interrupt just real quickly. I will speak to the late James Horner. He had a rep for doing this in every movie. He actually supposedly, not to speak ill of the dead, but he had a tendency to crib himself even. That there is stuff sure. He was kind of his career had kind of risen up about parallel to God, what's his name? James Cameron. That their big breakout movies that they had worked on, it was he had done the score for Battle Beyond the Stars, which is a Roger Corman. It's kind of a
Star Wars knockoff.
Yeah, it's a Star Wars Seven Samurai knockoff. What basically they just ripped off an entire Japanese film instead of cherry picking like George did, and that music led to him scoring, I think, Wrath of Khan, which has a lot of the same music in it if you listen to it. And then, it's if you listen to, he did work with Cameron for Aliens, which if you listen to that, it's he uses the same theme over and over. So yeah, it doesn't shock me that James Horner kind of got zapped for kind of reusing themes. But anyway, I'm sorry, I kind of interrupted your flow there.
Well, so the other thing I was going to say, and I didn't hear you mention this, so I'm guessing this will be news to you as well. And so I'm anxious, or I'm ready to hear your first blush reaction to this. Alexandre Desplat has in fact landed on his feet, so to speak, and he is getting ready to score the Valerian film that Luc Besson is doing. And Valerian, of course, was one of the inspirations for Star Wars. I mean, they're even the Valerian was a comic book, and I mean, you even look. Someone posted this. This is a while ago, and I apologies to whoever did it because I can't remember who exactly it was. But I mean, there are pages of that comic where like, oh yeah, that's Han and Leia. We're like, yep, that's the Millennium Falcon. Things like that. Oh yeah, that's the Hut killer bikini from Return of the Jedi, right? Like it's to the extent that it was that much of an influence on Star Wars, and so that's what Alexandre Desplat is working on now, which is sort of interesting.
Yeah, oh man, that's hilarious. It's funny that this comes up and then I forget about it. It's it's kind of feel like I've gone through a lot of these we've gone to this kind of weird thing where yes, George Lucas cribbed a lot from what was existing in the ether. And, obviously Valerian, which I wasn't particularly familiar with this, but I have seen this article before where they show the comparisons, Dune, Lord of the Rings, everything. So it's kind of like, it was almost like 40 years ago, that was not considered plagiarism, even though there were some suits brought forth that were dropped because of, I don't know, either gentleman's agreement or it wasn't worth it or something like that. But that's fascinating. That is fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's an FU? Do you think that's an FU?
No, I don't. Disney? I don't think it is. I think it's just sort of okay. That's interesting. Now, what I was saying about Yared and Troy, I don't think that Desplat is going to be posting like, well, this is the music that was going to be in Rogue One.
Right.
I don't think we're going to get anything like that either, because like some people have speculated that like, all right, some of that might get repurposed for Valerian. I'm less sure about that just because I think, it's going to be a completely different movie. But I guess we'll find out. Maybe Desplat will say like, yeah, this kind of got repurposed a little bit. This is a little ditty I had lying around to represent space travel, so I put it in this one. But yeah, I don't think that was Troy. That was even 12 years ago, and enough has changed since then that I think you're right. Like we're not ever gonna really hear any kind of grumbling on Desplat's part, at least for a long time, at least until like he's pretty sure that he never needs to work with Disney or Lucasfilm again at any point in his career. So yeah, I mean it's so you think then. So we'll transition now to talking about what we think of Giacchino being named the replacement. So you think we're in pretty good hands?
I do. I mean, it's the thing. It's like it's like that same thing we keep going over, and it's like, well, I would much rather have John Williams come in and work on it for two weeks or something like that. But if we can't get him, I mean, I'd be hard pressed to find someone that could replace a Desplat than a Giacchino. I mean, you could get guys that are kind of like people that are maybe like Bear McCreary, who did a lot of the Battlestar Galactica reboot stuff. He does a lot of stuff. He's a real talented composer. I mean, if you like, I've said, what's his name? Oh gosh, I've completely blanked on his name. The guy that did Shadows of the Empire, the score. Even like Kevin Kiner, who's done the Clone Wars and Rebels. They could have, you could have gone. I mean, you do want a cinematic kind of thing. I mean, they could bring someone up kind of from the. I hate to say that. I hate to call it the farm leagues because that makes it sound like I'm saying that they're not doing real work. But it is kind of a different. I think even they would admit the big screen, small screen dichotomy is important. Is
that the sports metaphor here?
Yeah, I know. I don't really. Yeah. I'm terrible with sports metaphor. Yeah, I know. I'm good.
It's fine.
I was listening to. So I picked like a weird. when I was getting ready for the show, I was like, well, I'll just go on Apple Music or whatever and pick a Giacchino thing. And I was like, well, I'll list a little bit of something that I'd already heard, a movie I've already seen. And then I picked one a movie I had seen, but I have very little memory of it, which was the Wachowskis, Jupiter Ascending. I think it was called. Yes. With,
Jupiter Ascending.
Yes. Jupiter Ascending, which came out in like January or February of 2015, and it, nobody saw it. And, I wouldn't really blame him. It's a really poor movie. I mean, it's not, but the score is fantastic. And I think you and I are probably both, having listened to that, the Score podcast, is that he was actually hired to do that, and he composed the entire score off of pictures or the script. Or maybe it wasn't, he didn't even see the script.
I don't even think it was a script. I think the Wachowskis gave him like index cards of, here are the characters, here are like different scenes of them interacting. Now we want to see what you come up with.
And we're back. I don't know if I'm able to fix this, but we've had technical issues. So we're going to move we're going to move on and stop talking about Jupiter Ascending, because I think it's burning my computer out.
Talking Jupes.
It's a really bad movie. It's so bad.
Yeah.
What's his face is a dog man in it.
Yeah. I might be a little more not skeptical, but circumspect, I guess, about the choice of Giacchino. And I should preface this by saying I haven't actually seen that many movies or TV shows that he's worked on. I think I've seen Ratatouille and the first J.J. Abrams Star Trek.
You never saw Super 8?
No, I never saw Super 8. Zootopia I've seen, and Inside Out I have seen. And that, I think, is the extent of my Giacchino exposure. And the thing is, like, I barely remember what any of those scores sound like. I mean, right. Zootopia, I kind of remember. I mostly remember that song that Shakira sings more than anything else, because they play it like 3 times in the movie. I don't remember the score itself that much. Ratatouille, I remember that it was kind of, there was what's it called? Accordion in it, and it sounded kind of like stereotypically Parisian. But I could not tell you what the music from Inside Out sounded like. And, I saw that a year ago or whatever that came out. And what was the other one I saw? Oh yeah, the first Star Trek movie. I could not tell you. And I did a little bit where, so I listened to that episode of The Score that he did, that had an interview with him, and played some of his music, and it all seemed fine. Then I also listened to the score he did for the most recent Star Trek movie, Star Trek Beyond.
Okay.
I was like, all right, let's kind of see what he's been doing recently that's also in this kind of science fiction thing. And I remember, so I just listened to this last night, and at the time I was like, all right, there's some interesting things here. But again, as of 12 hours, less than 12 hours later, or less than 24 hours later, I should say, I couldn't hum you a single tune from that score, right? Like, I was like, well, there were probably some drums, and like the cellos did a thing, and then the French horns came in, probably, right? Like, that's kind of the best I got for you. No,
I mean, that's
which is to say, like, at the time, I'm sure I enjoy, or like I'm not visibly angry at the music that he writes and the way it fits within the movies that he works on, but later on, like they're not very memorable for me. Other people might feel differently and love the Up score that he won the award for and think it's the best thing, and that's great. It's just, I'm just saying, for me personally, like I couldn't pick out a Michael Giacchino score, really, if you asked me to.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem, isn't it? Because you're kind of caught in this weird thing, because Star Wars is, it's a phenomenon, and music's important to that phenomenon, because when in 40 years ago when it all hit, it was like it was kind of selling. It was like they resold the past to the present. It's like all of a sudden this young upstart 28-year-old is like going back to his Flash Gordon youth, and he's stealing from French comic books, and he's stealing from Dune, and then like in the Dave Collins and Jimmy Mack's intro for Star Wars Oxygen, it was like, no, a lot of people respected those composers. I mean, he was literally going in and saying, like, why don't we do an homage to this time that people are kind of in the 70s were thumbing, everything was not Lalo Schifrin, or maybe Lalo Schifrin, or those
Korngold and
any like scores were like in the 70s were like Coppola was, well, I guess Nino Rota did The Godfather, which is a very traditional score, but my point is that it's like you only get one opportunity to do that, and I think everything else is like, I don't, when Duel of the Fates came out in '99, that was a big deal musically because people were really excited, and since it came out before the Phantom Menace, people were hadn't gotten like their Jar Jar Binks issues or whatever, and that was, but someone had I think even on Oxygen they had talked about how the way that the scores were done in the '90s were much more of like kind of like the early or near the death of the music video, and so a lot of things were framed in like, can we write an arrangement that we can put in a 4-minute video, that kind of idea. Let's have a hit. Whereas that wasn't what John Williams was thinking in '77, and that's what he wasn't thinking in 2015. Giacchino's kind of got this weird problem of like, if he goes out and does something too subtle, people will go, well, it doesn't really feel like Star Wars. If he does something too big, it'll be like this glaring thing, like, movies that have obnoxious scores. And I'm sure I could come up with a dozen if you gave me a week, but the two I always think of is, The Firm, the Tom Cruise, John Grisham thing, which Dave Grusin, the jazz musician, did a treated piano score, which is like, you watch it and you're just like, shut up with the piano. It's like he's like rubbing coins and stuff like that on it, and he's almost like doing a Ben Burt thing where it's like, oh, I'm going out and making sound effects, and like, this is like my own personal thing, is this is a really ridiculous example, but I'm going to do it anyway. It's my show. The movie Lady Hawk. You ever seen Lady Hawk?
I have, actually. For some reason, I saw it in, like, someone showed it in class in middle school once. I can't remember why.
It's a fun movie because it's a simple story, well told, but the English progressive rock icon, Alan Parsons of the Alan Parsons Project did the score, I think. And it's terrible. I mean, it's all done on a DX7, Yamaha synth, which, people, if you need to know what that sounds like, it's basically every Peter Cetera song from the 1980s, or it's that tinkly piano, it doesn't, even though I think he did use real instruments in some of it, but it stands out, so you're just like, oh, I wish somebody would rescore this movie. And I think he's kind of in this idea where it's like, Giacchino has this relationship with Disney, which is, I just realized when I was looking at it, guess what other movie he's scoring this fall? Doctor Strange.
Oh yeah.
So it's kind of like, if he doesn't
circle back to our earlier conversation.
Yeah, if he doesn't stick the landing on this, I mean, although I've watched a lot of speculating about movies, and I think you and I and maybe 10 other dudes in basements are the only people concerned about who's scoring what. It's, but
yeah,
not to deny us.
At least with Star Wars. Go ahead.
No, it's important. I'm not saying it's not important. It's important to me, and it should be important to people that like Star Wars. Yeah.
Well, yeah. In terms of like caring about who scores these things, I think, as you mentioned earlier, right? It's like, once you decide that it's not John Williams, then the question becomes like, all right, how much does it matter that if it's not going to be John Williams, then you can get whomever.
Well, it also puts a little bit of the, I in my other speculation that John Williams is director, or I'm sorry, not director, but the gentleman that actually conducted the most current version of the theme of the Star Wars theme. I forget his name. The guy
God, yeah, he's the conductor of the LA.
Anyway,
what is his name?
Was it Gustavo? I'm thinking of somebody else. Anyway, I had this whole rumor like, oh, he's the heir apparent for John Williams. Well, this is, if anybody would have,
Gustavo Dudamel.
Gustavo Dudamel. He would have come in and done it. So it's like they're not. That kind of disproves the point that he's the lady in waiting, so to speak, of his thing. Giacchino, though, you have to know that he was sitting on he was just kind of like, he probably came home to his loved ones and said, hon, I don't, JJ's doing Star Wars, and who knows if John Williams is going to do it. And that deep down he was kind of hoping John Williams was going to say, I'm not going to do it, and he could come in, but unfortunately that didn't happen. So, I mean, I like it in the sense of the continuity where I'm making a grand assumption that he's like, this is, his dream, but you kind of think it might be.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what his Star Wars fandom is like, and I'm not going to police his Star Wars fandom.
Right.
But in that interview on the score, he did talk about when he was working on Super 8 and being there with Spielberg and being like nervous because so many Spielberg movies were so inspiring for him growing up, and and that means it was John Williams's music that was very inspiring to him growing up with Jaws and Close Encounters and Indiana Jones and all the rest, or not Close Encounters. I can't remember what the other one he mentioned was. E.T. No, I don't think he mentioned E.T. He would have been a little old for E.T. Anyway,
he said something about Jaws. Didn't he say something about being on the set and
he was on? They were on the same set that he had been on with Jaws, and he was like, "Oh, I love Jaws and Indiana Jones." Right? Basically, he loved the John Williams scores for these Spielberg movies, right? And so, yeah, I mean, that is, I suppose, a point in his favor that he at least is going to. He's going to care about doing a good job here and kind of understand what's involved. I mean, the fact that I personally can't remember really any of his music, that may also not be him, right? That could be whatever J.J. Abrams was looking for, or these, Pixar directors were looking for. They very consciously, I think he talks in that score interview that, the directors, they wanted music that harkened back to an older time, not in terms of, the classical movie scores, but, that romantic notion of Paris and the Eiffel Tower and, music that sounds like that, music that sounds like Django Reinhardt or something like that. So, these movie scores, even with John Williams, it's not entirely up to them what these scores sound like. And so the fact that it's not very memorable may not be his doing. And also, that's that another part, and this is not a new or particularly incisive comment, but, there's this feeling all over the place that movie music, film scores have become really kind of homogenized in a lot of ways, especially for these kind of action blockbuster, studio movies, where it's a lot more about kind of rhythm and providing this kind of like driving score with a lot of like low to mid brass and cellos and weird percussion sounds and synthesizers and things like that, rather than like, okay, let's develop a melody and then let's develop that melodic theme throughout the entire 2 hours that you're watching this movie, and so that's another way, a sense in which it's like, all right, maybe it doesn't really matter who's doing these, because it's gotten to the point where lots of different composers kind of sound the same now. The the only other thing that makes me nervous too is the fact that he has probably 2 months at the very most to get this done now.
Yeah.
This movie is going to be released in just a little under 3 months.
The comment you said about the homogenizing kind of scores, it's no more evident to me than in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I mean, the Avengers, the music, there's nothing that memorable about it. But I honestly feel like Star Wars is like one of those kind of situations where they know how important it is. They're not going to let that happen. They know that's, there was a lot of things that would have been laughable in the original Star Wars that was kind of fixed by music. And so if Disney forgets that, they'll be in a lot of trouble. I really don't think they'll forget that. You know what I mean? But that, that being said, he is a company man. Not that being a film composer is like some kind of punk rock idea where it's like they need to be in conflict with the studio. But I mean, he has a relationship with Disney that goes way back to even obviously Ratatouille and Inside Out and Up. He's also was the composer for Lost. That being said, there was some criticism at one point about, I think it was, and this wasn't like a journalistic thing. It was mainly the English comedian and musician himself, Matt Berry, was on a show, and he had kind of talked about, he's a big fan of film music, especially some of the old I forget the guy's name, some of the English television shows that probably we've never even seen. But he did this dichotomy of that, what happened to the great themes for TV shows. And then when they used the example of Lost, which I think is a one note being kind of bent around the it was like a bowed note or something with some special effects. And so it's like, I actually, my exposure to Giacchino was him as being a more of an atmospheric kind of score, because it was within the television realm, especially because his first season, which I will say this, in comparison to Desplat and Giacchino, I've actually way before this, 10 years ago or so, I actually had purchased scores of his. I was a huge fan of like the early seasons of Lost and his music, because even in like second season, there was a lot of I'm also a fan of Jerry Goldsmith, but who isn't? But especially his like work on the Planet of the Apes films, and a lot of Giacchino stuff was heavily in the second season of Lost. Was kind of influenced by that, in my opinion. That being said, I guess my point is that I feel like, I mean, what do we got? 2 months to make this, so.
And that's the other concern, at least on my end, is that he has probably 2 months at the most to write this, to score the movie, and then to have it recorded, and that means tracking down an orchestra, tracking down musicians whose schedules all line up, that you can book them for recording sessions, and that means they're probably really going to have to drive through those recording sessions and really try to accomplish a lot of music in a short period of time. That how much, I'm sure, as we've talked about, he was very happy to get this job, and he'll try to do good as he can on it, but realistically, he's either going to have to put in some really late nights, or some stuff is going to have to slip through that, like, maybe a second draft on that cue would have made it more memorable or something like that. So that's, again, even though, I'm more lukewarm on Giacchino than you are, I still do say, like, okay, he's a pretty good choice. He has, the cachet, kind of, he has the track record. He's done a lot of work on similar kinds of things, but at this point, anyone they would have gotten, only having 2 months to do it, like, realistically, what can we expect?
Exactly. It's kind of like the thing where it's like, is this a dying, it's like, are we overthinking this? Cause it's like, is it a dying art? Cause I was thinking about, this Bradford Young cinematography thing, and I'll take full responsibility that I don't necessarily put cinematography, on the forefront of what I look for in a movie. But that being said, there was, I saw some article where they're talking about how there's been an issue in movie theaters about presentation, that like they're not reorientating the screen for certain aspect ratios, and that the home theater, the theater experience has become so much more of like, get them in, let's hope people can watch the movie without some crying baby ruining it or having some altercation between audience members. And it's like the presentation and music goes into that. And it makes me wonder, it's, is film music as important to people now as it was to 20 years ago? Is it like, well, as long as they're getting the emotion across? I mean, Brad Bird had said in this interview, and I'm paraphrasing on the score, this thing, is that I guess when he was hired to do, was it Ratatouille he were talking about? No, it was The Incredibles. Yeah. The kind of the Pixar movie, The Incredibles. And he basically said, like he said something like, you could really screw my movie up if you're trying to portray a different emotion in your score than I'm trying to portray on screen. And it's like, that kind of subtlety, I don't know, is that going to be something that they're going to want to even approach in a movie like this with such a short time frame?
Yeah, who knows, right? Gareth Edwards has moved on. He's doing other things. So, is he going to be available to sit down with Giacchino and, work out, okay, this is, what the music should be doing in this scene and what it should be doing in that scene. I don't even know if, to what extent other directors and other movies, they have those kinds of spotting sessions that, John Williams and George Lucas and now, J.J. Abrams, they're kind of known for being a big part of the scoring process. I don't even know if they do those for other movies, and it's going to be like sitting down in front of an electronic keyboard and a computer screen, kind of hammering this out. So yeah, you're right. A lot of those subtleties of make it a little quicker here, or having multiple chances, being able to revise what you're doing and based on feedback you're getting. Like, I don't know that they're really going to have that opportunity to do it. So it's whatever Giacchino puts out there, whatever his kind of first blush responses to the movie, that's going to be it. And that could work out, and it might not.
Yeah. When you put it that way, it kind of, it makes me realize, like, this could be, artistically a disaster. I mean, the truth is like, that idea of getting that emotion across, but is he going to be talking to Gareth Edwards, or will Tony Gilroy be in the scoring stage, or will the three of them be in there? Will Kathy Kennedy be there? This idea that's like, we really want this to, no matter what Bob says, we need to shoot for the bleachers on this one because we want it to be big. And, it begs the question. It's kind of like the House of Cards. It's like, well, if one of these things is weak, it's going to collapse. Artistically speaking, I know it's the toys are still going to come out and the tie-in books and all that. But I'm talking about it for the long term. It's the idea. It's like, if they have 2 months to do a score and they're like, well, we're just going to have to live with it. But it's like, well, that's, this is a Star Wars movie. This is a saga and a franchise. And when you start shortcutting, for the sake of expediency, then this is when franchises get weird, get wonky. It's like the old 70s thing about Planet of the Apes movies, where they had that kind of weird idea that kind of went out of Star Wars. Fortunately, kind of put the kibosh on for a lot of big budget sequels, as it used to be. They we made a Planet of the Apes movie for $10 million. And it did great. Let's make another one and make it for $5 million. And you're like, wait a second. Shouldn't you be making it for 20? But that's, all of a sudden it's when you get to 9 Star Wars movies, it's like, well, now we're getting up to Nightmare on Elm Street levels of
right.
of movies, and that it almost becomes like your commitment to like cinematic quality and care and not taking the easy way out. It becomes exponentially harder because it's so much easier to fall into that rut of, well, let's just make sure episode 8 has a great score because we got John Williams again, and like, let's just, we're just trying to solve the problem here that, the last act of Rogue One, is boring. You know what I mean? It's like, the big reveals, Vader's already been in the movie. We've got to, get this excitement, this final battle, and then they've got to get the plans back to the, so-and-so. And you're like, oh, I don't believe that anybody, when a production this big is just kind of saying, oh, we'll wing it. But you never know. You find out years later, like, oh yeah, we just kind of threw it against the wall and saw if it would stick. And you're like, I hope that's not going to happen here.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely seems at this point, even though they got, Michael Giacchino, he's a name, the sense you get is like, well, okay, they got someone who will like, it'll be fine. Like they're not going for like an award-winning score here, probably. Yeah. And at least given, again, the time constraints and everything else. But, your point about looking at kind of the long-term, the bigger picture, you expressed it in kind of artistic ways, but I mean, I'll be crass about it and I'll bring up the commercial side of it too, right? At this point, is the Rogue One score really going to be something that people are going to go out and buy, and 20, 30 years from now, they're going to put out, a new special edition of the Rogue One score with all of these interesting liner notes and alternate takes and things like that, the way it was tied to the special edition movies, but, having those re-release of the original trilogy soundtracks were great, and they deserved it. Right. So even... So I'm looking on Wikipedia here. The Force Awakens score. I mean, it debuted at number 5 on the Billboard charts, and only the Return of the Jedi soundtrack apparently was the only one that did not debut in the top 10 of Billboard. For album sales. So people are at least still willing to purchase Star Wars scores. I mean, the the Force Awakens. It said it says 100,000 album equivalent units, I guess that includes downloads, but it says of which 94,000 were pure album sales, right? The highest debut for a score only soundtrack since The Phantom Menace in 1999. So people are still willing to buy these Star Wars soundtracks, or at least the John Williams scores. Is this Rogue One score really going to be something that people are going to rush out to get their hands on, and then again, years from now are going to look back fondly on and say like, oh, I would love to get a re-release, an updated edition of this score and have that as well. At this point, it doesn't look like we're headed in that direction.
Right. And I don't know if even people enjoy it that way. I mean, it's like I said, it's like so much, it almost feels like it becomes the last concern, because even when it's consumed in your home, that's where all movies end up. Mm-hmm. That sonic space is fighting on these little 3-inch speakers that are mounted to your flat screen television, because most people don't have a sound system. And it's like, and they're definitely not discrete sound systems like, people have now. It's all either, sound bars that may not even be truly stereo. So basically it's like your dynamic range gets folded down, and your music's fighting with sound effects. It's fighting with dialogue. And most of these things have a thing where you push the button and it emphasizes the dialogue. So therefore it cuts the bass out of everything. So yeah, I don't even know if movies scores, in even a Star Wars score, is going to be enjoyed in the same way that it was even, say, 15 years or 17 years ago when the Phantom Menace came out. It's become like it's only staying important to people that it was important for in the first place. I mean, right. I think I'm like, when I say it's like, a bad score could ruin the movie, it's like, yeah, it might, I guess my concern is that it might ruin it for me. It might ruin it for you. I don't feel like John Q. Public or Jane Q. Public is really going to care.
Right. And yeah, I guess where I'm I'm coming down. Like, I doubt that it's going to ruin the movie because they got a good enough composer that, you know, if they had just gotten some random person, then yeah, maybe it would be generic enough that it wouldn't be inspiring. You know, so I don't think it's going to ruin the movie, but I don't think it's going to elevate the movie either. And I don't think it's going to be, again, something that like people are going to want to return to 20 years from now and be like, oh wow, that was such a great score, and I want to learn everything about how it was made. So
yeah, and also, you know, we didn't even talk about, but you know, it doesn't really matter because we don't know how much are they going to say like, hey, that's great, but we need you to throw in the Force theme or the you know, we want this thematic. You know, you were talking about the use of the Imperial March, which wasn't even introduced in the trailer. Yeah, it wasn't even introduced in the saga until Empire Strikes Back, so it's goofing up the timeline. It's like, are they going to adhere to the idea like, well, we can't really use that in its purest sense until Empire, so we can only hint at it, so you can you know, you can riff on that riff, but you can't use it, or you know, that kind of. But who knows? I mean, Vader might appear and it'll be dun boom 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 boom, and you'll just be like, oh wow, they went there.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, because you know, a lot of the audience might be expecting it, or say, "Why didn't we get Vader's theme when we saw Vader?" and not really care about like, well, the timeline of when these things were made, and it wasn't in A New Hope, and you know, a lot of people aren't really going to care about that.
Exactly.
So they're going to want to hear the Darth Vader's theme, right? The Imperial March,
right? So I guess we should probably, we've been having some technical issues today, so I think we're going to wrap up a little early because I'm going to knit this thing together. If you want to interact with us, tell us what your feelings are about this change in score, or what if you're a Giacchino fan or you were a Desplat fan and you were excited and kind of disappointed left, you can email us at hosts, that's host with an S at the end, at talkingbirdcast.com. We're on Twitter at Talking Birdcast. We have a website, which is kind of, it's just kind of everything that we do in one
TalkingBirdcast.com.
Right. And we're on YouTube now. I did try, I had a failed attempt at doing kind of a live stream of the new DLC for Star Wars Battlefront. There's something glitchy about it, and I just hated the way my voice sounded, so it's not there. I don't even know if it necessarily be something. I think my career as a Twitch streamer began and ended in one evening, that being yesterday.
At least now you know.
At least now I know I don't want to waste my time.
You can never look back and go, if only I had thought to try it.
If I'd only become Mom, I'm a professional game streamer now. You're going to have to start addressing me as such. Also, if you want to help out the show, the best way, well, I mean, you could give us a 5-star review on iTunes. That's always nice. But if you're like, I don't like writing reviews, I just want to do something passive, best thing is use the www.talkingbirdcast.com/Amazon. And what that is, it's just a portal of some sort.
Portal.
That you go through. It's a click-through link, and what happens is when you purchase something on Amazon, we get a little kickback of that money from Amazon. It doesn't cost you anything, and we appreciate it when you do. I think that's all we have for Talking Birdcast. I have been Robert Zachary.
And I remain John Llewellyn.
Thanks for listening, and may the Force be with you.